Good afternoon again, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, New Blight Tool under Act 33, Designating a Redevelopment Authority to Act as a Land Bank. Today's presenters are Winnie Branton, Principal of Branton Strategies and a Blight and Technical Assistance Consultant for the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, Mayor Matt Pacifico from the City of Altoona, and Andrew French, Executive Director of Fayette County Redevelopment Authority. Thank you again, everybody, for joining, and thank you to our presenters. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to Winnie Branton.
Thanks, Colleen, and welcome, everyone. Webinar today, we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to present for you what the Act provides and how you can go about designating a redevelopment authority to act as a land bank. When we complete going through that discussion, I'm going to turn to Matt Pacifico and Andrew French, who are early adopters of this tool, and I'm going to ask them to share some of their experiences and talk about how they intend to use the tool of a land bank through the Redevelopment Authority. So thanks so much again for joining, and we'll get started. So first, I want to start off by saying that Act 33 of 2018 is a one-page law that essentially amends the land bank law. It was passed and it was enacted by the legislature in June, and then Governor Wolf signed the law in June of 2018, and it passed unanimously. Another example of blight as a bipartisan issue in Pennsylvania with support from both Republicans and Democrats. And as the key sponsor of the bill, Senator Stefano, was looking to authorize municipalities and counties to be able to designate the redevelopment authorities to act as land banks to avoid the need to create a new entity. And we'll talk a little bit about that purpose as we go forward. So here again, why Act 33? What was the rationale? In Pennsylvania, many land banks are being administered by redevelopment authorities. There are approximately 21, I think at last count, land bank entities in PA, and many of those were being administered by redevelopment authorities. In many counties, the redevelopment authorities are already responsible for addressing blighted structures, and by allowing those redevelopment authorities to be designated as land banks, you avoid the need to create a new entity. You can save some time and money and be more administratively efficient. That was the rationale behind the adoption and passage of Act 33. And in enacting Act 33, there was recognition that land banking as a tool for blight was valuable, and the idea was to try to make that tool available to a broader audience and do it in a more efficient and more time-saving way. So what does the Act provide? The Act provides that certain counties and municipalities may designate their redevelopment authorities to act as their land banks. So now what land bank jurisdictions, as defined under the land bank law, have two options. They can create a new land bank entity, or they can designate a redevelopment authority to act as a land bank. There are a number of cities in Pennsylvania that have redevelopment authorities, as well as the county redevelopment authorities. And if those cities are land bank jurisdictions, which I think they also can use their redevelopment authority to act as a land bank. So here in Act 33, there is a definition of who's eligible. And as I said, Act 33 really amends the land bank law. So that's the citation you'll see here. Section 2104 of the land bank law was amended by Act 33. So in that section, it says that a land bank jurisdiction located in a county of the 2nd A, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th class can designate its redevelopment authority to act as a land bank by ordinance. So when you think about that definition, two things pop out. What's a land bank jurisdiction, and what are those county designations, and how do they work into determining whether or not I'm eligible? So we look at the next slide, and we look at what does a land bank jurisdiction means. For purposes of Act 33, it really is a county, a city, a borough, a township, or an incorporated town with a population of more than 10,000. So counties, land bank jurisdictions, and then any city, borough, township, etc., that has a population of more than 10,000 qualifies as a land bank jurisdiction. You'll note that in the section of Act 33 that talks about who can use this tool, specifically excluded are counties of Class 1 and Class 2 counties, which excludes Philly and Allegheny County. So how do you designate? As the section of the law provides, you have to pass an ordinance. And that ordinance has to expressly designate the redevelopment authority to act as its land bank. And the ordinance has to be filed with the Department of State, and there's a filing fee of $70 that goes with that. And because the Department of Community and Economic Development has really been the lead in helping land banks and redevelopment authorities that want to be land banks get started, it's a good idea to send a copy of your ordinance to DCED as well. So what should the ordinance include? The law states that the ordinance shall designate the authority as land bank and contain the specifications of subsection A5, 6, and 7. So what does all that mean? First, it means that you have to designate the redevelopment authority using express language. And the two ordinances that I've seen, which are Altoona's and Fayette counties, simply state that. By this ordinance, we're designating the redevelopment authority to act as our land bank in accordance with, and then citing to the Act 33 and the land bank law. So when you look back at that section of the law, it says, and contain the specifications of subsection A5, 6, and 7. So what do they mean? A5 talks about the manner in which residents can have input into the decision-making process for land banking. A6 talks about certain preferences that should be afforded to former owner-occupants when a land bank or redevelopment authority is acquiring occupied properties. And then A7 is the catch-all, which I love, which states that, it refers to additional terms and conditions that the county or municipality deems reasonable and necessary for operation of the land bank. So in that section, there's a lot of discretion for the governing body to determine in the ordinance to designate the redevelopment authority any additional terms and conditions that they'd like to include that they think are necessary for effective operation of land bank activities by the redevelopment authority. As a general matter, Act 33 provides that the redevelopment authority that's designated as a land bank needs to act like a land bank when it's wearing that hat. So the ordinance provides that, or the law provides that the designated authority has to establish rules, policies, and procedures consistent with the land bank law. It also expressly states that the authority as land bank shall only acquire, hold, and dispose of property in accordance with the land bank law. The idea behind these provisions is to make sure that authorities, redevelopment authorities acting as land banks follow the land bank law. As I mentioned at the beginning, the power given to local governing bodies to designate their redevelopment authorities is included in the land bank law. So the intention is that both redevelopment authorities and land banks will operate within the bounds of the Pennsylvania land bank law. There are a couple of things in the law that were needed to be addressed to make clear that they didn't intend to conflict with some of the redevelopment authorities' existing structure, membership, organization, etc. And that one part of that goes to board composition. Under the land bank law, a board can include anywhere from 5 to 11 members, and one of those members must be a community representative, meaning that person can't be an elected official. They have to be a resident of the land bank jurisdiction, and they have to be a member of a community or civic organization within that jurisdiction. So redevelopment authorities that are being designated as land banks already have a board in place, and those boards are typically 5-member boards. So in order to make it clear that there was no need to upset the redevelopment authority board in the first instance, Act 33 included a provision that said, you don't need to change anything with your board membership or your organizational structure, except if you have a board vacancy after you're designated to act as a land bank, you should appoint a replacement who satisfies that community representation element under the land bank law. Now, the redevelopment authorities that I've talked to and I've been working with, almost all the time, one of their members satisfies that community representative requirement, because usually folks who are involved as volunteers on boards like redevelopment authority boards are often active in their communities, so they would be able to satisfy that requirement. But if you do designate your redevelopment authority to act as your land bank, you should be sure that if a board vacancy opens up, that you're prepared to appoint a replacement who does meet that requirement if you don't have someone there in the first instance. So that's board composition. The next piece that was covered in Act 33, just to be clear what the requirements are for redevelopment authorities and to satisfy some of the purposes and objectives of the land bank law in terms of transparency and accountability. For accounting purposes, the Act 33 provides that the finances for the redevelopment authority when acting as a land bank have to be retained and accounted for separately from the finances for other authority purposes. And that was because some redevelopment authorities in Pennsylvania do a lot of different projects, and if you were a citizen and you just wanted to see where the finances and projects were that relate to the redevelopment authority acting as land bank, it could be difficult for you to find that. So the legislature recognized that there's interest in seeing how this new tool and new power is being used by both land banks and redevelopment authorities. So there was included a provision that required this separate kind of the separation of accounting and activities for the authority when it's acting as a land bank. And you'll note that Section 2119 of the Land Bank Law provides for an annual audit and report of activities, and the Act 33 provides that any redevelopment authority that is designated to act as a land bank is subject to that section as well and those requirements. Eminent domain was one of the issues that was under discussion when Act 33, then SB 667, was being considered by the legislature. And I'm not sure that that issue has been completely resolved by the law, but I think there is enough there for us to move forward and act accordingly. So if you look at the land bank law itself, there's a provision in the land bank law that expressly states that land banks do not have eminent domain power. Redevelopment authorities, on the other hand, have eminent domain power that's given to them under the urban redevelopment law. I think that was passed back in 1945. So that in itself presents a little bit of a conflict because the redevelopment authorities designated to act as land banks are subject to the land bank law. So how was that resolved? Well, there is nothing in Act 33 that provides that redevelopment authorities designated to act as land banks lose their eminent domain power. So redevelopment authorities that are designated still have those powers and still can exercise those powers. I think what Act 33 in requiring a separate financial accounting and then report of activities is suggesting that that designated redevelopment authority should clearly articulate and distinguish when it's acting as a land bank. That makes sense to me, and that's what I've been talking to those communities that are interested in using this tool should do, to figure out a way to make clear when the redevelopment authority is using the land bank power, so that you'll be able to show and demonstrate that you've complied with the land bank law and that it's clear to the public. Because critical to all these tools where a government is getting involved in real estate acquisition and disposition is building public trust and making sure that the public understands and is given access to information that shows that those transactions are done in accordance with the law, and that anyone can take a look at the transactions and be comfortable and satisfied that whatever policies and procedures were adopted were followed, and that that all are acting in accordance with the law and with those policies and procedures. So some of the key takeaways on Act 33 are that eligible counties and municipalities now have two options. You can pass an ordinance creating a land bank, or you can pass an ordinance designating your redevelopment authority to act as your land bank. Either way, the land bank or the redevelopment authority must follow the land bank law. So it provides, the Act provides new powers that have minimal impact on the way a redevelopment authority operates. Specifically, your board composition, which we discussed. You have to make sure that if you have a vacancy, you fill that vacancy with a community representative if that person doesn't already serve, or someone that fits those requirements isn't already on your board. The second requirement is that you need to segregate the financing and accounting for land banking activities from other activities that the authority performs and is involved with. And then you need to acquire, dispose, and hold properties just like a land bank does in accordance with the land bank law. So those are really the key takeaways, and just note that, again, care should be taken to segregate those finances and activities so that it's clear where the redevelopment authority is acting as a land bank. So as I mentioned, there are two early adopters, and if anybody else on the call is about to adopt an ordinance or has one in the pipeline, when we unmute the phone lines and have questions, I'd really like for folks to weigh in. And then I would just ask, too, that as you go through this process, if you do pass an ordinance, that you share it with the Housing Alliance, because the PABlightlibrary.com has been a great resource to share documents like ordinances with other communities that are interested in doing the same thing. So we have models out there, and you don't have to spend time and resources trying to reinvent the wheel when others have already gone forward and done the same work. So again, Fayette County designated its redevelopment authority to act as its land bank, and they did that as the first community to do it, and they adopted the ordinance on September 20th. Shortly thereafter, the city of Altoona passed an ordinance on October 10th, and it became the first city that adopted an ordinance that designated its redevelopment authority. And both of those ordinances are available in the Blight Library. And I'm aware of at least 3 other communities that are considering using this tool. So again, if you are, we'd love to hear from you. So before I ask Matt and Andrew to weigh in, I just want to highlight a couple of things from the land bank law that should be in the mind of folks who are thinking about using their redevelopment authorities as their land banks. Land bank operations require that you collaborate with all the taxing bodies. Now, not everyone's going to need an intergovernmental cooperation agreement if you are not intending to tax share, or you're not going to be dealing with properties that have liens or claims against them. But overall, the way a land bank can work to move properties back to productive use is by discharging tax liens and claims, and that requires agreements from the other taxing bodies. So redevelopment authority designated as a land bank in order to discharge those liens and claims, would have to have an agreement with the three taxing bodies, meaning the county, the municipality, and the school district. In order to enjoy the 550 tax sharing that's authorized under the land bank law, again, you would need an agreement with those taxing bodies that they are willing to share 50% of the taxes collected for up to 5 years on properties that the land bank acquires and then transfers out to new owners who pay taxes. And again, that's just on taxes collected, and it's not going to be for all properties, because some properties the land bank acquires or the redevelopment authority acquires as land bank and transfers out may not generate taxes. They may be tax exempt. And then the last piece is property maintenance. Land banks in PA, a lot of them have intergovernmental cooperation agreements, especially where it's a county land bank. And under that intergovernmental cooperation agreement, if the county land bank acquires a property, the municipality agrees to maintain the property during the time that the land bank holds that property. So those are all important operational pieces to land banking activities in PA. And then the last piece of collaboration that you have to think about is a land bank's power is really, a key power of a land bank is its ability to acquire properties at judicial sales without having to be the highest bidder. And the way that's done is through a process whereby you negotiate, you land bank or you redevelopment authority can negotiate the acquisition of judicial sale properties in advance of the sale by a negotiated agreement with a tax claim bureau. So you would want to and need to work out how you would be selecting those properties and working with the tax claim bureau to acquire those properties through the judicial tax sale. So those are all some examples of the necessary collaboration with taxing bodies that goes with operation of a land bank or land banking activities. The next one I had mentioned already was transparency and accountability. And you want to make sure that you maintain a publicly available inventory of properties, whether you're a redevelopment authority acting as land bank or land bank, that you have acquisition and disposition policies and procedures, and again, community representation on the board and your annual audit and report of activities. So all of those things foster transparency, public trust, and support for land banks generally across Pennsylvania. So focus on those is going to be important if you want to have that kind of public trust in your operations. So I've talked enough now, so I want to get to the other two presenters, and I'll start off by asking Mayor Pacifico to get started and share with us about where the city is, how the city got to this point, and any other advice or stories or recommendations that he wants to offer. You know, we're listening. So thanks, Matt, for joining, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right, thanks, Winnie. This land bank is something that I've been pursuing here in the city of Altoona for about 3 years now, maybe a little bit longer. And we really got the ball rolling on this last year after we formed a Blight task force, which Winnie helped us out with that. And so one of the key takeaways from the Blight task force, one of the strategies, I think it was the top strategy, was to look into a land bank. So then once Pennsylvania passed Act 33, we decided that that was the best route for us to take, because we didn't want to go through the process of creating a separate authority. So, you know, for how we want to utilize the land bank, it worked perfect for us. And quite frankly, it gives all the same powers and abilities as having a separate land bank. So, you know, unless you just want to have its own designated authority, I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to go this route. And so, you know, the priority bid at the judicial sale was probably the main reason for wanting to form a land bank here in Altoona, because we see a lot of the properties on the judicial sale that are desirable. Usually, most times they fall into the hands of somebody who doesn't have the means or the capabilities of rehabbing those properties, and so it goes through the cycle of not collecting any taxes for 3 years until it ends up back in the tax sale again, and usually at that point it's too far gone to be saved, and then it typically just ends up in the repository. So that was one of the main reasons for us. We want to make sure that we're getting these properties into the hands of responsible individuals who do have the means to put these properties back on the tax rolls. And what was the other question you asked?
Another question, like thinking about how you're going to use the land bank powers. I know we had talked about starting slow and pre-qualifying developers so that the city redevelopment authority wouldn't be holding a lot of property. So maybe just talk a little bit about the approach at the beginning.
Yeah, so we don't really want to be in the business of holding on to properties. So we are going to take a slow approach, and we're going to pre-qualify developers or responsible individuals who are already current landlords in the city, who have a good reputation. So the whole main goal of it is to block the speculators, the ones that go to the tax sale and they'll buy up 5 or 6 properties without ever seeing any of them, and then picking the one that requires the least amount of work just to get it up to code compliance so that they can start renting it out. Our longer term vision would be to maybe begin to start acquiring and holding onto properties that are maybe part of a bigger strategic redevelopment strategy, that we might have for certain neighborhoods or sections of the city, start assembling larger parcels of land that could be redeveloped into larger commercial type projects.
Yeah, that is for any land bank that's getting off its feet in Pennsylvania, because there's not dedicated state funding for land bank operations and for redevelopment authority operations as land bank. Usually there's a need to start slow, and it also makes sense to start slow because this is a relatively new law in Pennsylvania. Now, there are some great examples of operating land banks in Pennsylvania that, again, if you go to the PA Blight Library, there's a lot of resources there, and you can check out the land bank websites across PA just to see how they're operating. But when they all got started and are getting started, they're starting with, they're not starting with, hundreds of properties, because it's important that you have your process in place to ensure, again, building that public trust and making sure that you're moving forward in accordance with the law and with what the community expectations are. And what's been fun about working in Altoona, besides the fact that the Mallow Cup factory is in Altoona, and I've stopped there many times in the last year, the community there is very actively engaged with the activities of like task force and other initiatives in the city that are meant to revitalize and build the community. So that's been really rewarding for me. And the other piece is that all these discussions led to more discussions with the county tax claim bureau about ways to improve the judicial sale process. So that kind of collaboration and discussion is really useful when you're dealing across multiple levels of government. So it gives opportunities to talk about other other ways that the two levels of government can work together to address blight. So that's been useful in Altoona. So, Mayor, any other points that you want to highlight? We're going to take a lot of questions, I think, at the end of this. So if you're finished, I can pass the baton to Andrew French. I'm going to switch to Fayette County slide. And I'm going to ask Andrew if you could do the same thing. Just give us some background on why you went this route and your role in getting the legislation passed, and share with us, what your plans are for using the land bank activities.
Sure. Thanks, Winnie. So in Fayette County, similar to a lot of municipalities, once the land bank legislation was created and enacted in 2012, we looked at it and we actually contemplated a lot whether we wanted to form a land bank here locally. And we also observed, a lot of the great work that other municipalities across the Commonwealth were doing with their land banks, and heard a lot of stories about just their different experiences and challenges that they faced. And I think we kind of realized early on that in a lot of respects, our redevelopment authority was already acting as a land bank. We were already undertaking a lot of the same types of activities that land banks undertake, as well as a lot of other activities. Fayette County Redevelopment Authority, as Winnie's slide indicates, Fayette County is a little over 130,000 in population. Our redevelopment authority serves 42 municipalities in the county. We are probably more like a mid-sized redevelopment authority in the Commonwealth, and we typically do a lot of infrastructure projects in addition to blight abatement, housing development, homeowner rehab, economic development projects, a lot of different projects across the board. And typically in a year, we'll administer somewhere between $5 to $7 million in different funding sources through the local, state, and federal government. So we are a mid-sized redevelopment authority, and as I've explained in the past, in Pennsylvania and in fact across the country, no two redevelopment authorities are the same. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what redevelopment authorities do. A lot of that is guided by what resources you're able to acquire and what partnerships you're able to develop with different organizations. And in Fayette County, we have developed some key strong partnerships. Again, we work throughout all 42 municipalities, kind of serve as the county's lead regarding community development and single-family affordable housing and blight abatement types of activities. We do have two other redevelopment authorities in the county. We have two city redevelopment authorities in Uniontown and Connellsville, and obviously we work in partnership with those groups as well, but rely heavily on them to perform activities in both of their communities. And both of those cities are under 10,000 in population, so we are working in partnership with them in regards to the formation of our land banks. So again, the main reason why we decided that we didn't want to form a separate land bank was just the duplication and the staff time and the resources that it would take to not only establish the land bank, but then administer the land bank moving forward. I will stress, though, that, again, there were a lot of good things, and there's a lot of good land banks out there that are doing good things, and we learned a lot from that. I think one of the benefits was kind of watching the process that those land banks went through to establish some of the policies that they put together. So it was beneficial to kind of learn from those groups watching through that process. I know, Winnie, you mentioned there were a couple things that the new law, Act 33, states, and we didn't really look at them as barriers. In regards to board composition, the urban redevelopment law already indicates that my board has to be comprised of residents of the community. So all 5 of my board members are residences of Fayette County. So we didn't look at that as a challenge, and as you indicated, they're all involved in the community, and so really all 5 of our board members would meet the criteria contained in the Land Bank Law and Act 33. Obviously, separate accounting and the request for an annual audit, we have those systems already set up, and we do have an audit completed annually given all the other funding sources that we administer. And the community input and public inventory of property, also that's readily maintained by the Redevelopment Authority already. And community input is something that we engage in every year. So we administer a lot of different federal programs on behalf of the county and their municipalities, including the Community Development Block Grant Program. And in Fayette County, we have 9 separate entitlement communities. So annually, we're holding over 20 meetings with those groups and with the community to gauge what the need is out there and talk about some of these issues specifically related to blight. Similar to what Mayor Pacifico indicated, I think the main power that we look to benefit from with the new land bank powers is the acquisition of properties through the tax sale. So whether that's through the repository or through the 2 tax sales, and Fayette County does hold those tax sales on a regular basis. So we really look at that as the main criteria. Not so much the tax sharing, although that could be a possibility moving forward. And Fayette County did include in their ordinance the ability for us to tax share with the county's portion. In Fayette County, we have, again, 42 municipalities and 8 school districts, and I really wasn't looking forward to approaching 8 different school districts to ask them to grant us that cost or that tax sharing ability. But again, if there was a specific project that lent itself to, we might pursue that. And then the discharge of tax liens and claims. Again, we did receive the county's approval to discharge their tax liens and claims. But we did not approach the municipalities and the school districts. Our intent would be to do that again on a case-by-case basis. Some of the activities, and again, when we looked back at when the land bank law was being contemplated and then when it was enacted, during that period of time, again, our redevelopment authority was acting as a land bank. So, we've been acquiring properties for resale to property owners. We've been rehabbing properties. I think we rehabbed 33 owner-occupied residential. We've demolished over 40 different blighted properties. 7 major commercial blighted properties were demolished during that time. And then also new construction of homes. We've built about 40 homes during that period of time that we've sold to low to moderate income homeowners. Our next big project moving forward, we actually are in the process right now of demolishing 2 larger commercial structures. We have one property that is located in our repository that will probably be the first time that we actually use our power as a land bank to obtain that property. It's an old former hospital that we would then demolish and try to repurpose. And then next year, obviously, we would work on identifying other properties either through the repository or through the tax sales that would take place. And that's one thing we're in the process of setting up, is working with our tax claim bureau to set up how that procedure would occur. I think there's some education we need to do with them just to let them know that we have this power now and how that process is going to work. Before I guess I turn it back over, I would just like to say how successful it was originally Senate Bill 667. That's what became Act 33 of 2018. That process actually began in probably early 2017 when I had a conversation with Senator Stefano indicating this idea, this concept as to expanding the powers of land banks to redevelopment authorities. It's something that he thought made sense, just again to remove some of the duplication, add some efficiencies, and the fact that we were here in the community already working, performing those land bank activities. He introduced the legislation in May of 17, was quickly endorsed by our professional organization, which is the Pennsylvania Association of Housing and Redevelopment Agencies. So they put their backing behind it, which added a lot. And it quickly was approved by the Senate 46-3 in July of 17. We then had a little bit of a delay with the House Urban Affairs Committee, and that's when it was reworked a little bit to put it into its current form. But after that was done, it actually passed the Urban Affairs Committee unanimously in May, and then as Winnie indicated, it passed both the House and the Senate unanimously in June of 2018. And I think that just speaks volumes, one, that it had such support, and I'm sure that had to do, with this focus on blight in the Commonwealth, as well as, the attention to these land bank types of activities that were occurring. But it also was amazing that it passed in one session. It moved through so quickly and had such unanimous support. And obviously, I don't think that could have been accomplished without the hard work of a lot of people, not to mention, our state senator Stefano, who really championed this cause.
Thanks, Andrew. And many of you who are on the call may be familiar with that process too, because many of you weighed in on the bill, and that helped the Housing Alliance be able to submit comments and work with the legislature and Andrew and Senator Stefano to make some revisions to the bill that made it more responsive to some of the needs of existing land banks and other communities in PA. So the whole process, as Andrew mentioned, was the basis of everyone wanting to add more tools and make it easier for communities to be able to use those tools to address blight, which is a problem that runs the gamut from communities of all sizes across PA. So it was it's another tool that we can use when we're looking at these properties and trying to figure out how to get them back into productive use. So thank you. And a couple of things just one thing that Andrew mentioned I want to highlight for Altoona as well. Having an organization that's already engaged in these kinds of activities makes it easier, right? So in Altoona, the Community Development Department, which also, like what Andrew mentioned, is doing home repair programs, demolition. Like they have that kind of expertise already dealing with blight. They administer and work as staff for the Redevelopment Authority. So when you're looking at what your options are, see who's already doing the work, because you don't want to, again, reinvent the wheel. So at this time, Colleen, if we're able to, I don't know if that's the way you do it, open up the lines and then see if anyone has any questions. I noticed in the registry that there were a number of folks from nonprofit organizations, and I'm be interested in hearing, how they see this as a tool for them in terms of property acquisition or being more involved with land banking across PA. So I'd be interested in hearing from them as well and answering any questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Winnie. So since there are a bunch of folks on the call today, I'm going to ask if you have a question that you want to ask, either type it in the chat box or unmute your line by pressing *7 on your phone keypad, and that will allow you to ask your question. So if you have any questions, feel free to press *7, and that will unmute your line. I do see a question from Weston that just came in. Is Fayette or Altoona using CDBG or home funds to achieve an induce?
So I can speak for Fayette County. We use the gamut of funding. So we do use CDBG funding. We do have, and we use that for infrastructure improvements, blight abatement, a whole myriad of activities. We also do have an active home grant that we're administering. We also have funding through Fayette County established the countywide demolition fund. We have a county affordable housing fund. We also use funding through FAIR, PHA FAIR, and then private funding too. So we actually have a nonprofit that we work with, and there's some funding through USDA and some private lenders that comes into place with our first-time home buyer activities.
Yeah, and in Altoona, we're using our CDBG and home dollars almost exactly the same way that Andrew said that they're utilizing them in Fayette County. Altoona is a direct entitlement community. We haven't discussed any possible ways of utilizing any of those dollars for land bank projects yet, though.
Okay, great. And then we have a question from Stephen. How might local governments use this to encourage affordable housing?
Well, this is Winnie. I think when people ask me how can we use the tool if you're trying to develop properties or have a particular use in mind, the land bank and the redevelopment authority is a tool to acquire properties to accomplish that use. And oftentimes the land bank can offer properties at a lower cost because you're able to direct, and same way with the redevelopment authority, you can choose the developer who is going to develop the property in accordance with your needs. And if affordable housing is a priority and a need, then it's an acquisition tool. So that's what I think. How about Matt or Andrew? Do you see other ways to encourage affordable housing with your land banking activities?
Well, I think that with the land bank, you're able to remove a lot of the barriers that stand in the way of acquiring properties. So that in and of itself, is going to make the costs for the developers much lower and can definitely encourage more affordable properties to be put back onto the market.
Yeah, and I this is Andrew. I think we're definitely engaged in affordable housing activities, both through new construction and then homeowner rehabilitation, and then a limited amount of acquisition. And then rehabilitation, and then resale to low-income home buyers. I also see the land bank tool as benefiting a lot of existing, probably low-income population groups. Just in Fayette County, like in a lot of communities, we've had a lot of out-migration, which has left an overabundance of housing stock that really has no useful life, and so it's having that negative impact on kind of those fragile communities. So in a lot of cases, we're going in and targeting strategic properties for acquisition and demolition or demolition, kind of in those communities that are on the edge or are struggling, with blight. So obviously, I think there's lots of studies out there that show the tremendous benefit of kind of going in and eliminating that blight, that what impact that has on the existing residences in those communities. So I think that we'll probably be doing a lot of those types of activities using the land bank powers.
Great. And there's a question from Glenn. If there is already a land bank in a county that was created by several municipalities, does that preclude a county from naming a redevelopment authority a land bank?
That is a great question, Glenn. And I just pulled out the land bank law because there's a limitation in there that states that if a county establishes a land bank, the land bank shall have the power to acquire real property only in those portions of the county located outside of the geographical boundaries of any other land bank established by another land bank jurisdiction located within the county. So that provision to me says if you already have a land bank that was created as a multi-municipal land bank in your county, I don't think a county redevelopment authority, or I don't think a county is precluded from naming its redevelopment authority to act as a land bank, but it wouldn't be able to operate within the municipalities that had already formed their own land bank.
But, and Winnie, we should clarify too, I don't know that there's anything, there may be some restrictions on a redevelopment authority designated as a land bank using those land bank powers in that other land bank jurisdiction, but I don't know that there's any restrictions on a redevelopment authority operating as a redevelopment authority in a land bank designated area. Is that correct?
No, I agree with you. I think that when this issue came up when SB 667 was being discussed, because there was concern that there would be competition at these judicial sales. So the idea was to make sure that local control still was the priority, either if it's the land bank law or if it's a redevelopment authority acting as a land bank. So there's nothing that precludes municipalities that have formed a land bank already from welcoming in the county redevelopment authority that's been designated as a land bank. But I would read that provision of the land bank law and then the redevelopment authority law itself, which has similar kind of geographic limitations on operations, as stating that you would need to have some kind of agreement. But your question, Glenn, went to, would it preclude a county from naming a redevelopment authority? And the short answer to that would be no, it wouldn't preclude the county redevelopment authority from being designated as a land bank.
Great, and we have a question from Steve. Logistically, what documents do you think will be necessary in actually transferring properties from the Tax Claim Bureau to the RA/land bank?
Well, I can start. Hi, Steve. I can give an answer that I think is the way I would proceed, and then ask if Andrew or Matt want to weigh in. But if you're acquiring properties from the repository list, then I think that's just an agreement to transfer, because the land bank law allows for the transfers of repository list properties to a land bank. So I would say that means the redevelopment authority too, once it's designated. So that's a simple one. If you're acquiring properties at the judicial tax sale, because the owner of those properties can take it off the list by paying the taxes before the sale actually occurs, those kinds of transactions usually involve an option agreement where the land bank or redevelopment authority would enter into an option agreement with the Tax Claim Bureau, and essentially that document would state, if this property makes it to judicial sale, the land bank / redevelopment authority is going to acquire it for X number of dollars through the judicial sale process, because it can drop off. That's my short answer.
Yeah, and this is Matt, and that's the route that we're looking to take here in Altoona. We've already been in communication with Blair County commissioners and the Tax Claim Bureau about going that route, and they seem to be on board with that.
And that's the same in Fayette, so I think that's a similar process. We're still working through it, but I would envision it would be similar.
And if you wanted to see a county land bank that's operating that way, I think Westmoreland County land banks procedures are for tax sale are posted on the PA Blight Library under operational resources, and there's a I think there's a one-pager that talks about that process. And if it's not on there, I can certainly check and send that over to Colleen for distribution to those on the call.
Great. And then Steve wanted to let you know that on November 27th, the Somerset County Commissioners passed an ordinance naming the Redevelopment Authority of Somerset County as the county's land bank. Congratulations, Steve, in Somerset County. That's terrific. So now we're up to 3. Anybody else? We do have about 2 more minutes for any last-minute questions, so you can type them into the chat box or you can unmute your line. There was a question. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint, and if any additional resources early next week. We'll send it out to everybody who's on the call right now. Great. So if there aren't any more questions, I want to thank Winnie, Mayor Pacifico, and Andrew again for presenting today, and thank all of you for joining. And have a great weekend. Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you.